Welcome back to another edition of the Hart2Heart Podcast, and my guest today is Kelsi Sheren. She's a veteran. She's also the host of the Brass and Unity podcast. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So I first learned about you when I saw you on Jocko Willink. I'm sure you've heard that before. Hopefully that's a compliment.
Depends.
And, so there's a lot of, things that I've seen you've been doing online. I find very interesting, kind of, crosses over with my patients in my clinic and what I'm doing as well. So, I kind of wanted to start there. But Kelsi, before we kind of get into that, can you give the audience a little bit of a brief background about yourself?
Yeah, I'll try to make it as tight-knit as possible. I'm the CEO of Brass and Unity, which is a company that we used to recycle old casings, turn them into pieces, and then donate 20% of the net proceeds to different veteran organizations all over the world. We're the home of the Buddy Check bracelet, which is the original bullet casing on a bracelet. I'm also the host of the Brass and Unity podcast, but I also am a psychedelic integration coach, and I work on advancing psychedelics and getting access for other individuals, as well as I am a published author of the new book that came out this July called Brass and Unity, One Woman's Journey Through the Hell of Afghanistan and Back. So I do a lot of things. I work with a lot of people. I'm kind of all over the place, if you will.
Well, I think that, that was a perfect background about yourself. But there's a lot of things there that I want to unpack, particularly with the psychedelic stuff. That was where I was going to start with you. So as you may or may not know, Kelsi, like we were chatting about before the show, like I've treated thousands of veterans, mostly with cannabis, sometimes with other medicines as well. I do use ketamine. Unfortunately, we can't prescribe psilocybin and some of the other psychedelics right now because of legality reasons. But, when it comes to veterans, cannabis kind of came on the scene maybe around 2013, 2014, kind of popularized around that time. So, what was the major change there that you saw? Like, how did it become something that was, once looked down upon or frowned upon by the military, and now not necessarily saying that the military is open to it, but certainly a lot of the veterans are using cannabis. So what was the change there?
Well, I think first and foremost, the military pre-deployment, when they were doing drug testing, when they knew the guys went to coke all that weekend, they just shuffled them out the back door before we did the testing, right? So it's like we knew that vets are doing drugs. We knew that. We're all aware of it. And the service acted like they didn't know, but they just turned a blind eye. So it's much better to be doing a plant-based drug versus a chemical compound that is just going to affect your brain negatively. So I think cannabis came on the scene really because they were overprescribing pharmaceutical medication at a pace that, you couldn't sustain your job anymore. You couldn't work. You couldn't deploy. You couldn't have access to certain clearance when you're on certain meds. Like you just could not be who they wanted you to be. So part of the reason I think cannabis came in, forget the legalization portion where you saw it get medically legalized and you saw the federal recreational get legalized. You always had doctors, maybe I didn't know you at the time, but I know my treatment doctor, Dr. Greg Passy, was one of the first to get a veteran through coverage with cannabis. So because I was under him, he kind of knew the steps and processes to get me moved through to be able to have cannabis as a prescription, because he was seeing the long-term damage that SSRIs and these uppers and downers were doing, not only to me psychologically, but as well to the hormone systems and everything else that they affect, the gut health, the biome, all of that everybody says, oh, they're safe for long-term use. And we all know they're not. So
Kelsi, not to interrupt,
yeah.
So you kind of went through some of the pharmaceuticals and didn't have a good experience, and then you found cannabis?
Yeah, so
correct?
I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder on my deployment in Afghanistan, and I was given 11 different pharmaceutical drugs while in country running a machine gun.
Wow.
So part of the issue with that.
And those drugs, did they affect your cognition, your ability to focus, your ability to, carry out your functions and duties?
Oh my God. I almost fired a weapon on a child. So that should give you a good indication. I was seeing things that weren't there. I'll send you afterwards. I'll just privately send you the list I was on. And I think breaking them down, you're going to understand the severity and the damage that was going on. And at the same time, I was 100 pounds and 19 years old. So a lot of these drugs that I was on were meant to be for short-term use, but they end up being for almost a decade-long stretch, which the repercussions later on are so significant and so difficult to work back afterwards. through my 20s. So I spent from 2009 to roughly 2015 on just straight pharmaceutical intervention, coupled that with physical movement, CBT, EMDR, grounding, you name it. I was doing all of the other additives we could, and it just wasn't getting better.
And what negatives were you getting from the pharmaceuticals specifically? How
much time do you have?
Well, we got an hour, but maybe you can tell us in a brief.
Yeah. So let's look at this from a basic standpoint. I was, the uppers, the downers, the sleep meds, things to get you to sleep, things to keep you to sleep, things to wake you up in the morning, things to keep you level in the morning, antidepressants to make you not suicidal, and then other types of drugs to keep it so that the contraindications would kind of stay pretty level. So I went from being somebody who had gone through a very traumatic experience, and like you mentioned, when Jocko asked me, do you think if somebody would have just sat you down and said, look, what you're feeling is normal, what you experience is what is normal, and this will get better, do you think you would have been okay? Absolutely. But that was never given to me as an option. So, medication was the first tool. Within 1 week of the injury on the operation, I was drugged right away. I didn't have time to process. I didn't have those around me to help me process. The tools were not provided. Now, if you took the medication I was on, say when I came back into country, I couldn't get up in the morning. The brain fog was out of control. I couldn't go to bed.
Low energy.
Oh, no, low energy doesn't touch it. I mean, I would take my medication at 7:00 at night. I would go to bed. I think I went to bed. And then I'd had full conversation with my husband. Don't remember anything I said to him. Wake up in the middle of the night, make food in the kitchen, wake up on the floor, have no clue what I was just doing. Get up in the morning, try to get up in the morning. And then I would have to stay in bed till roughly 10 or 11 a.m. because I was so groggy and I couldn't function, rinse, repeat, and continue for years and years and years.
Wow, that sounds like, you went through a lot with the pharmaceuticals, but hopefully, and it sounds like you have, found a lot of relief with other medicines. So what was the first alternative medicine that you found relief with? Was it cannabis or was it something else?
No. So I come from that, just like most of us, that generation of like, don't do drugs, just say no, that whole demonizing of plant-based medicines and other things. And I really learned quickly that if I wanted to not only have children, if I wanted to be a functional member of society, or be somebody that could remember what I did the night before, I could no longer be on these medications. So I expressed that concern to my doctor in a very serious manner. He took me completely seriously and said, look, I understand. You're at a stage in your life where you should have a sex drive, and I didn't. You should feel things, and I didn't. I was still suicidal with all of the meds, and I was literally existing. I was not living. So for me, cannabis came in 2015, and we used it as a bridge for the nighttime medication. So for sleep meds and to get me to sleep. And then we used oil to keep me asleep.
What was the initial thought though on like, okay, I need to use cannabis? Was it just that you had so much of a bad experience with the pharmaceuticals? Was there like one particular friend who said that, you know what, I have the same symptoms as you, I use this, my symptoms are better now? Like, what was it? What was the initiating event that said that, okay, I need to start looking at cannabis?
It just got to the point where I spoke about it in my book, and there was a moment where I woke up on the floor in the middle of the night. And I was at the time I was living in Ottawa. This was before I was fully medically released from the military in 2011. So I was doing long distance from Ontario to British Columbia. And I lived there. I feel like I can say that. So
you can say okay. we all feel
I know you do. So that's why. So I woke up, I was living in military housing, and I woke up on the floor in the middle of the night. And I had a butter knife with peanut butter on in one hand. And I had a loaf of bread and the toaster going. And my cat was just licking my face, just checking to see if he could eat me or not yet. If it was like past the point of like, do I eat her now? And I woke up, and my head hurt really bad. And I was like, I think I hit my head. And so I had eaten half a loaf of bread at that point. Zero recollection, absolutely no clue what was going on. And I said, enough is enough. I can't live like this anymore.
I could see how that would be a moment that would kind of rip you out of that. Eating half a loaf of bread and not knowing that you did it sounds like you had some pretty bad side effects from those medications. And did you have any weight gain with it as well? You know, because a lot of those medicines do. Or maybe you kind of look like you're genetically kind of just always going to be kind of thing.
Oh no,
But
this takes work, son.
Okay. I respect that too.
Yeah.
I understand. I see all the workouts and stuff that you do.
It takes a lot of work.
But did you put on any weight from anything?
No, if anything, I ate less. I found I had no appetite, right? That anxious stomach feeling, even regardless of the medication, I wasn't eating very well. I was struggling to actually put food in. And so if anything, I had maybe lost some weight. And I think I'm 5 foot tall. So my healthy weight can go from anywhere from like 108 to like top end for me is like 115, which is like, I'm feeling a little thick right now. So, and I know that's a lot, but for my body frame, if you're just listening, I'm a compact human. So that's
what I meant.
Yeah.
I know you work hard, but you're a small stature.
Yeah, for sure. Nature. Yeah. I'm a pocket person. So for me, I was staying really physically active in that time anyway, regardless of the exhaustion. I was still using movement because it was the only thing that was keeping my dopamine and my serotonin up. Like I needed to move, and that was pretty obvious to those around me when I didn't move. So the medication itself didn't cause weight gain, but it did have adverse effects on every other aspect of my life.
Okay. And so when you started using cannabis, was there one particular form that you started using first? Was it oils? Was it more like, CBD? Was it more high THC? Like what was it specifically? And I do want to ask you about your sleep and THC after. So please remind me if I forget.
Yeah, no worries. Ask the person with the TBI to remind you. You got it. So for me, cannabis was a very slow entry into, because I was quite afraid of what people would think of me. At the time I believe we were planning to get pregnant. That was the next step, was that we wanted to have a child. And so we actually went down and sat with the head of Children's Hospital in British Columbia. And I said, look, this is the issues. These are the concerns. This is what I'm nervous about. And they were very blunt in saying, we cannot say this is safe, but comparable to what you will be on, we would prefer to see this. So they would never put that in writing. They would never say that. This was a one-on-one meeting with my husband and myself and this doctor. So I started with, before we even got pregnant, I started smoking flower, and I only used it at night.
What kind of flower?
I used a high THC with a lower CBD at the time because
And that was mostly at night. And did you immediately get results with less nighttime terrors, better sleep?
So the nighttime terrors, that took a little bit of time to find a strain that really sat well with me. It helped me get to sleep fantastic, and it kept me asleep for a roughly 3 to 3.5 hour time frame. Depending on the nightmares would depend if I would fully wake up or my husband would have to wake me up. So I would stay asleep, but I'd be in the nightmare.
Okay.
Yeah.
So did you find that to be helpful or not helpful when you were, asleep but in the nightmare?
So for me, it took a little while because I wasn't just experiencing night terrors. I was like sweating so much that I'd have to change the sheets every single day. It was very bad.
And so when you started using the flower and you got, some decent results, I guess, for about 3 to 4 hours, it sounds like, did you ever think, okay, I need to move to, higher THC, or I need to move to an oil or something like that? Because, the classic thing, my patients are going to laugh that are listening to me when I hear me say this, but like, vaporizing, smoking, that helps you fall asleep, but
it doesn't keep you asleep
because it goes to your system quickly, but it's out of your system quickly, right? So sometimes 1 to 3 hours, people are waking up. Usually, though, initially, especially like you had noticed when you initially start, it's always more like the 3 to 4 hours and say kind of 1 to 3. But then the oil comes in, and that usually stays in your system for more like 6 to 8 hours. So did you move to the oil after the flower, or how did you kind of manage your sleep?
So we started to do a combination, and that's where the most success would come from. So we would smoke at night to keep me asleep, to get me asleep, and then I would ingest oil to keep me asleep. And that's when I would do a pretty even keel, like 10 and 10 or 15 and 15, THC and CBD. The CBD was helping a lot with my body injuries and my body pains. So that was taking the inflammation down, which was fantastic. The THC was keeping me asleep. I would still wake up in the morning soaking wet head to toe, but at least I was sleeping larger chunks throughout the night.
And did you wake up a little more refreshed at that point? Like a little more energy?
It took a little bit of time. Yeah, absolutely. Comparable to being on the pharmaceutical medication and the hangover in the morning, there was no hangover if you are comparing them directly.
Okay. And it's really important too, what you said earlier about, getting a balanced strain at night.
Yeah.
So that's why I always get people to use a balanced strain at night. So it's basically for a couple different reasons. So one is that if you continuously use high THC, and I know this is going to upset some cannabis users, but if you continuously use high THC all the time, you are going to develop a tolerance to it. And then when you use that high THC, you're not going to get the symptom relief that you're looking for. So, that's one thing. The other thing too is that CBD does have benefit on its own, like you mentioned. I mean, it can be fantastic for reducing inflammation, for mild to moderate arthritis. It's not for like severe pain. Maybe someone will get, some pretty decent relief at high doses, but it's definitely fantastic for mild to moderate arthritis overall. And I'm sure you've seen this study, Kelsi, but it was done on rats. So sometimes I get, a little bit of flack for that, but they gave CBD to rats and they showed that it can actually decrease learned fear.
Yes.
And when you're talking about PTSD, that's what PTSD, it's learned fear. Like I ask my veteran patients, one of the first questions I ask them is, who gets the groceries in your family? Because a lot of vets hate going to the grocery store. I don't know if you went through that, Kelsi. You're kind of, smiling there and nodding. But, a lot of my veteran patients have said, like, going to the grocery store is a nightmare because there's just so much stimulation. You got the lights going on in your head. You got people, that are talking to you at the counter and stuff. And you have to make all these selections for food. Sometimes people forget things. They forget their list. So it can be, very overwhelming for people. But, that's something that people learn. You're not like born afraid to go to the grocery store. But when you use CBD, sometimes you can unlearn that learned fear that people have.
Absolutely. I think the grocery store for me was, at the very beginning when I got home, it was everything. I tell a story in my book where I actually physically attacked a family in the Walmart in Ottawa. When I was so triggered and I had a complete flashback and I was completely gone, and there was a family at the cash that was of Middle Eastern descent. And when I say I went at them, I physically went for them. So, I stopped doing those things on my own for a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. And so what results did you get with the CBD outside of the decrease in physical body pain? Did you get any like mental health benefits from it? Did you find that it just helped with your symptoms during the daytime? Yeah,
there was definitely a decrease of the level of anxiety, or that feeling of fight or flight being at its very, very peak. I noticed quite a bit. It took a little bit though, because I will be honest, I'm still dancing between plant-based and pharmaceuticals. So it was hard to tell which tool was being, used properly at the right time, because things were still being integrated.
Okay. And so we talked a little bit about, your personal nighttime use, which I totally appreciate you sharing with everyone. What about in the daytime? Did you use cannabis during the daytime as well? Was it helpful there?
I started to use it a little bit for anxiety and just for the ability to go out in the open and not feel a constant threat. It took a little bit because of the area I live in. Quite near it is predominantly South Asian. And so the war I just fought it started to look very similar at home very quickly. And so for me, it took a little more than CBD. I had to have a THC as well. And the other, like I said, still at that time, the pharmaceutical medications that I was on as well.
Yeah. And I think that's important for people to know, because initially, when you come back, your PTSD is going to be worse. So maybe you will need, more CBD, more THC, particularly, during that time. But then eventually the goal should to be to come off it. So, I always say you want to be on the least amount of medicine for the shortest amount of time. But that being said, if you're in, a severe crisis, you may need that, the least amount of medicine may be a lot of medicine for a short period of time.
Absolutely.
So, did you find that, initially you used quite a bit and then eventually you were able to taper off, or did you just kind of find a point and then you've kind of used the same amount since that time?
So I definitely was on a very little amount when I first started, because I didn't use cannabis when I was in high school. I was not that person who experimented with any of that. So for me, I didn't know how I was going to be. I didn't know where the line was, where if I took a little more, how would I feel? So it was a lot of experimentation for a little while. And then I became pregnant. And once I became pregnant, I realized I didn't want to be on any of these pharmaceutical drugs anymore. So I started to lean on the cannabis a little bit more, and I stopped smoking it and I started using oil instead. And I used high CBD and flipped it so it was less THC. There's mixed reviews around studies around cannabis and pregnancy. I mean, you go to Jamaica, you hear incredible things. You hear a lot of really incredible results. You hear about children's IQ bumps. You see a lot of that. And then you come to North America and they're like, you will kill your child if you use cannabis. It's like, well, that's just not reality. So I leaned on what I felt
I
most
don't
comfortable.
take CBD away from any women when they're pregnant,
Yeah.
because I don't think that it's, a detriment to the child. And I know that it can be, very effective for helping the woman during that period. But go ahead there.
Yeah,
Kelsi.
because my whole thought processes was really around this: calm body, calm mind, calm development. High strung body, high anxiety, high strung baby. And so I did everything I could, knowing that I was diagnosed with PTSD. And I say that with bunny ears because I don't believe in PTSD. I believe in post-traumatic growth. I believe in injury, not disability.
Yes, love it.
And so they diagnosed me with that and then told me on top of it, I had major depressive disorder, which I was like, well, if you live in Canada, most of us do. So the thing was, I was trying really hard to be conscious of long-term use, especially while pregnant and then while nursing. So I was very cognizant of not smoking, oil, CBD, less THC. There was maybe 0.1 or 2 of THC. That was really just to make sure I was getting through sleep rather than just having the nightmares. But it helped a lot.
I mean, you always have to look at the risk benefit, and it seems like you did that, and it seems like you had a good pregnancy. From what I can understand, your pregnancy went well, your child's fine.
Child's actually shockingly smart. And I'm not saying that I'm like, he's above a lot in engineering and mathematics, and he's quite an intelligent child. He's a critical thinker. We've had no issues developmentally. He's been fantastic. He came a month early, but that's because I'm a tiny human and I had nowhere to go. He did have a little bit of issues when he was born in terms of jaundice, but that was due to the way he was delivered and the whole. So we really have had an incredible pregnancy and an incredible child, and that's why we stuck with one.
Amazing. Okay. Yeah, I know a lot of people are sticking with one these days just because kids are more expensive and, very, very time consuming.
Well, he was healthy, right? He was a healthy child, and it felt like a very rare thing nowadays. So we left fate with that and said, we got one really healthy boy. Okay, we're good.
Well, sounds like you guys are happy, and I'm absolutely happy for you.
Thanks.
So that's fantastic. So we talked a little bit about cannabis, but I know that you have, expertise in plant medicine as well. So plant medicine is kind of a funny term that encompasses a lot of different medicines these days, depending on who you talk to. But, like we kind of talked about before the show. So unfortunately, I'm not able to help veterans with psilocybin at this point. Like I said, I am able to help them with ketamine, which is a completely different drug. And we can talk about that maybe another time. But for psilocybin specifically, why is it, do you think, that it's taken so long for Veterans Affairs to, not even come around yet? It seems like, we've had cannabis that's been, at the forefront of, treating veterans, certain groups of veterans now for almost about 8 years, maybe even 9 years or so. You would think that during this time there'd be some kind of transition to psilocybin. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Why is the military being so difficult with treating veterans with psilocybin?
Well, that's a loaded question, because we're going to be bluntly honest right now. The reason that the military does not prescribe something along those lines yet is because the government hasn't found its way to make money off of it. Give it time, it is coming. I testified at the Senate subcommittee for emerging treatments for veterans and RCMP members, where I testified on behalf of psychedelic intervention and psychedelic assisted therapy. And I wasn't speaking about ketamine because that is a different sort of animal. And I'm not a big, huge fan of ketamine. It's a dissociative. And I believe more often than not with things like PTSD, people need to go inward, not outward more, right? So when you're looking at things like psilocybin can be particularly useful, but it is dangerous to governments. Psilocybin is something that is a mind-opening substance, but it is also something that can alleviate depression. And when done,
and we're talking about magic mushrooms,
yes,
for everyone listening. Sorry, we said psilocybin.
No worries.
I should have.
Mushrooms.
Yeah.
So the thing about mushrooms is they help you go inward, and they also do incredible things for depression. Well, if you fix depression, like truly fix someone's depression and PTSD, they are no longer a vending machine for you. So let's just acknowledge that for a single second, because that is a big reality.
And also, too, let's acknowledge the fact that you were on 11 pharmaceuticals, right? Like, so that means they were making money off, 11 different drugs, right? Like, if you're just on psilocybin, that's just one medicine, right? So when you go from 11 medicines to one medicine, I mean, unless that one medicine is incredibly expensive, the other ones are cheap, then you're going to be making, significantly less money. But
we do love making people reliant. And so SSRIs and those types of drugs, when going with withdrawal, you'll understand very quickly why you're not supposed to go off of them at a rapid pace. So psilocybin does not exactly, and you don't have that property with psilocybin. Psilocybin is so fantastic. It's like taking a snowstorm and slapping it down on top of your neurons and being like, we're going to give the brain an opportunity to create new pathways. And when you do that with psilocybin, you're giving the person the opportunity to go, I can fix this. This is something I can work on. It is not a cure-all or a fix-all for everyone. I'm very consciously aware that not everybody is a safe candidate for psychedelics. There are people who have close relations or themselves bipolar schizophrenia. But then I've also heard, incredible results with things like schizophrenia and aggressive amounts of physical activity, right? So there are ways to use psychedelics safely, but they are not for everyone. And they need to be done in a safe set and setting with an integration program on the front and back end. So saying I'm going to take psilocybin or magic mushrooms to fix my depression, but not knowing what you're taking, how much you're taking, the frequency you're taking it, and then not having a proper plan on the front and the back end is just dangerous. So the government in particular with psilocybin it is getting there. I will say this week, was it this week or last week? I believe it was the end of last week. I was one of the few that got approved under the Canadian Special Access Program to use regulated psilocybin. I'm like one of 130 or something ridiculous.
Congrats.
Thank you. But I did that through Apex Labs because I'm about to be the proof of concept patient for a macro dose in their clinical trial. So psilocybin is coming. It's just about how they want to regulate it and who they find it acceptable to get it from.
Okay. Now, looking at all of your experience, like say if you found a young Kelsi Sheren, she went through exactly what you went through, and she came to you and she said, I'm experiencing all these symptoms, they were exact same that you were experiencing. Would you then try to direct her to psilocybin? Would you try to direct her towards cannabis? Would you try to direct her towards both? Or what would be your overall approach, say, if someone like that reached out to you?
So it'd be a longer conversation for sure. I'm not the first person to be like, oh, you need this. The first thing I would look at is I would break it down from your sleep to your diet to your movement and then the medication you're on. Because the other
I love you said sleep first.
Oh, it's the most important. We understand that. That's why we use it as a form of torture for so long. Let's be honest. You know that better than me. Right? Yeah. You take sleep away from somebody, you watch that person break very quickly. 24, 48, 72, you're going to see a different human on the back end of that. So we understand that you cannot handle outside stressors and your own stressors internally if you do not have the capacity to do so. So that comes from restful, deep REM, recovering sleep. So I would look first and foremost, and I've done this with clients, I go sleep, I go diet, I go movement, and then I go medication and outside stressors. Now, a lot of psychedelics cannot be mixed with SSRIs. We know that.
Right. That's a very important point. You got to be off them. I mean, the safety point is usually 2 weeks, but it should be at least 5 half-lives of the drug.
Right.
Look, go ahead.
So, and the reason I say that too is because you're like, well, what would I say to me? I'd be like, well, you can't use them until we figure out the medication problem. So if I were to have a different client that came to me with the same issues, but was removed from the pharmaceuticals, was completely clean of pharmaceutical intervention, my next step would be, what is the main stressor here? Is it survivor's guilt? Is it loss? Is it the stressful event itself? And I would build a plan around that person and then a specific psychedelic. So like I said, psilocybin, mushrooms, great for depression. Absolutely great for depression. I microdose psilocybin 4 days a week. 2 on, 1 off,
How much?
2 on. It really depends. I do live in British Columbia, so it does get gray. And I am the type of person who is affected by no sun, low light, and a lot of rain. I'm working on reframing, but I am definitely still that person. So for me, on average, 150 milligrams up to potentially 350, depending on how heavy the depressive state can feel. But
do you mix that with niacin or lion's mane or anything else? You just do it pure?
Yeah. So I don't love niacin. If you go back and listen to the Brass and Unity podcast, there's an episode with the captain, Kyle Creek. And there's a moment where you'll learn why I don't love niacin. You can see it from my waist. You can see the blood climbing, and I start laughing, and my face and everything is so red and so swollen. You can see the white laugh lines. I don't love nice, and I don't love the way it makes me feel. That being said,
it does have a heavy flush. I'm one of these weirdos that like it. I can take 1,000 milligrams to get into the sauna and love it.
I don't like how the tingling feels. I don't like the burning sensation. I'm not about anything nice and related, but I will say, so Mindful Meds here, this is the company that I use for my microdosing and a little bit of a heavier dose if I'm looking to sit with something. They're out of Vernon, and they stack. So there's cordyceps, there's lion's mane, there's reishi, there's all the ashwagandha, you name it. But depending on the dose I'm taking that day will depend on the stack that is built in with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. So when you're looking more for energy, I imagine you're going to look for higher cordyceps. If you're looking more to relax more, probably more for like reishi, it's probably, I think, more into that.
Absolutely.
Lion's mane is supposed to be more for your cognition. Does have some nerve properties though as well for pain that are kind of interesting as well. I haven't looked into that too much, but something that is very interesting and certainly very difficult to treat.
I do love lion's mane though for individuals who are not ready or wanting to take an active mushroom. I recommend lion's mane across the board. I find it helps those people that are really, really, really high or really, really low. It seems to level them out nicely over long-term use.
And you find about 500 milligrams is good, 1,000 milligrams? Like
I go for a higher dose if there's just starting. I go like a nice 750, 1,000. And then if like, oh no, I'm feeling good. Okay, then we taper it down a little bit. Just try to find a level that works within their system.
Yeah, I mean, I've had, like legit like friends who, I trust their expertise and their knowledge. And they've said that like when they take lion's mane, they do feel the difference. It is nootropic. I even had one veteran patient that said that the lion's mane, so not psilocybin, not magic mushrooms, was very effective for his PTSD. He said it brought it down roughly 50%, which is amazing. So, there are other properties to mushrooms outside of psilocybin that can absolutely be very, very helpful. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. I was going to ask you about, how there are other veterans, abusing psilocybin or abusing cannabis that you found, or do you feel that for the most part, the education has been solid for the veterans where that most people are using the medicine properly overall?
I don't see people using the medicine in an abusive state. I can be honest and say that I've worked in the community enough. I've done enough integration, enough around this space to go, I haven't seen any abuse towards cannabis or psilocybin or ayahuasca or 5-MeO. I don't see it because psychedelics they're non-addictive, and they are not something, if you've actually sat with a true psychedelic outside of a microdose, it's not something that's super fun. I mean, it does have the ability and the property, MDMA, all of those things. Of course, there were street drugs before, but it is not something that I have seen others abuse to the point where there has to be a conversation. Maybe you see others who should be maybe looking more inward when they're feeling something and they reach for cannabis right away because that's a hard feeling, but that's not an abuse. We're reaching for something to cope here. So it's more of a coping tool rather than until they're quite ready to have the hard conversation.
I 100% agree with you on that. So, not to generalize too much, but I find that cannabis is better for treating symptoms, whereas psilocybin is better for kind of getting to the root problem and for healing. Now, that being said, like cannabis can provide that. And, some people may argue if you do, kind of a high edible dose of THC, you can get some pretty good psychedelic experiences too. But for the most part, from what I've seen, I find that cannabis helps treat the symptoms, but the psilocybin is one that makes you go inward where you can kind of, fix some issues. I think you have something to say about that.
Listen, I think cannabis is a master plant as well, right? So you think of master plants, you think ayahuasca. Well, cannabis is a master plant, and it is. If I'm pretty sure it's a master plant. Last time I checked. My point in saying that is, if you were to use cannabis in the right set and setting, in the right dosage, it can 100% act very similar to dealing with the root problem. But you're not going to get that sitting by yourself smoking a joint unless you know how to breathe into it or get into a meditative state, or you're in a safe setting where somebody is guiding you. So I think cannabis absolutely has the ability to do that. Just most people don't know how to do that with that tool.
And Kelsi, sorry.
No. There was something else I wanted to mention when we were just talking about nootropics and stuff, because there's a nootropic that I've been taking that I find incredibly useful.
I was just going to ask you that. I can't believe you're saying that.
Sorry. No, go ahead. It's your show. I'm so sorry.
No. I was literally just going to say, with psilocybin, you talked about like the ancillaries that you use. Obviously, you don't use the lion's mane, but you use like ashwagandha, some of the other functional mushrooms like reishi and cordyceps and all that. When you use cannabis, are there other tools that you use? Like, do you mix anything with cannabis, or you just kind of believe in the entourage effect and that we should just kind of use that on its own?
Well, I think that it's twofold. So it's absolutely dependent on the situation you're in. So when I'm going to get on my road bike and I'm going for a long ride, I take a dose of psilocybin and I take lion's mane and I take a heavy dose of cordyceps. Now,
nice.
And then a couple puffs of cannabis and then off we go. It's just, that's my quiet time. So that's a different use for it. But what I will say is, like, on a daily basis, nootropics are a big part of my life for my brain health because of my traumatic brain injury, as well as just coping through the world right now. And I was starting to see a dip in memory recall for me. And that became concerning. I'm 34. I don't love that. That's not ideal. And so I've had my blood work done. I don't know if you know the individual, Dr. Mark Gordon. He's an incredible.
I know of Mark Gordon.
Yes.
We've actually been connected before, but I should actually reach out to him by email again.
Yes, you should. He's an
yeah, because I know he's been on Rogan like 4 times. Rogan's talked about him a bunch. Like, he knows.
Yeah.
He knows so much about TBI and PTSD. It's crazy. And also too, he understands the, like you mentioned it earlier briefly, but the hormone aspect of it. So Kelsi, I also do a lot of hormone replacement therapy. Okay. So I'm a big believer in hormone replacement therapy. Low testosterone levels are just awful for people. And actually my latest post I did yesterday, the day before, I mentioned how because when I was on Rogan, I mentioned how opiates just destroy a guy's and girls' testosterone system. And I've talked about this before, but girls need testosterone too. Like, that's where your sex drive comes from. That's where motivation, energy comes from. Mm-hmm. And you probably have heard this before, but milligram for milligram, women have more testosterone in their body than estrogen. Yeah. Right. So like, testosterone is very, very important for women. Anyways, that's kind of
no, it's great, but you should 100%. If you need anything to get to Mark, let me know. I'm one of his patients, but he's also been on the show, and we've gone through an entire gamut of all of these things on the Brass and Unity podcast. So brilliant individual, but we do blood work. So I'm not the person who's like, oh, I take this. My first response is go get your blood work checked. Before you start taking nootropics, before you start supplementing, go get your blood work checked, period. And in Canada in particular, if you are a Canadian, be aware they do not test for vitamin D, omega, or your testosterone levels. You need to ask that specifically, and you have to pay separately.
And that's for total and free.
And free as well, exactly. So that's why we've done the blood work here before, fought the system. They wouldn't do it. We went down to Mark and said enough is enough. So Mark helped get us, my husband as well, because he has a traumatic brain injury, very severe one. And so from a nootropic standpoint, one of the things that I've seen a huge improvement on with me was, I've gone from, I am on a low dose of testosterone as well. So my levels are out of whack, of course, with the TBI, that's normal. So I do a low dose of that. On top of it, I'm a big fan of peptides. I think they are great.
I'm a big fan of peptides too, and I can talk all about them, but you just made a really important point about the testosterone. So what improvements did you see when you started using the testosterone? Because I think a lot of women would be really interested in this.
So at first for me, we're not quite sure if it was situational yet or if it was from the testosterone. I did develop a little bit more anxiety than I would have liked. But shortly after, I saw a calm come. And if you know me, I'm not calm.
Because testosterone is going to make you want to do stuff. Right. So if you're like just sitting down and you have all this energy, then it's going to feel like pent up energy. Mm-hmm. So I understand how, you could feel that way, but go ahead.
I was also on a book tour, so I think there was outside influences stressing me out. It's fine. But so it brought a sense of calm and it brought a sex drive back. One of the largest implications of overuse of SSRIs for a decade for me was the absolute flatlining of a sex drive. From the age of 19 until I think maybe a year ago, I had zero sex drive.
And I don't want to, ask you anything that you don't want to answer, but, when you say no sex drive, do you mean like you're not having any orgasms like almost at all during this period?
No, I was having orgasms, but they were very hard to get to. And even then the want to have sex just was never there. So my husband, having a TBI, undiagnosed at the time, he had no sex drive. We just thought we were normal humans. We would have sex, once or twice a week. And we were like, oh, that's good. Like that's, but it was never like, I want to rip your clothes off right now. Like I'm going to eat your face. It was never that. And I'm like, I'm in my 20s. What is happening here? And he's an incredibly good looking man. We've been married for 13 years, great marriage. It's not like, oh, you don't communicate. We have a great marriage, a very healthy communicative marriage. We should be ripping each other's clothes off. Nope. It's how we were. And we didn't understand that our hormone levels were directly correlating to that. But mine was the overuse of a long-term 150 milligrams of Zoloft every day for a decade. Just wreaked havoc on my body. But the nootropic I want to highlight because I'm seeing incredible improvement with my focus, my cognitive recall, as well as my ability to feel energized. Is I am using right now, it's called alpha GPC or CDP choline. Yeah,
alpha GPC and CDP choline. Yeah. There's I don't know. There's one from, again, I'm not paid to say this or anything, but there's one from ATP Labs, and they have one called NeuroPrime. I think that one has alpha GPC in it, but I've also used the Citicoline before from AOR. Again, not being paid to say any of this stuff, but those seem to be, two of the better nootropics. Now, do you use them every day or?
So I've been using the alpha for about a week and a half now, and I am blown away. I'm also on a multivitamin that's tailored specifically to my body. So we combine it so it's all in one pill so I don't get capsule fatigue. And then I am also on, I believe it's pregnenolone as well.
Pregnenolone.
Wow.
That's a great medicine. I put a lot of people on that. Cognition can just go
through the roof right away. And energy-wise.
People say I feel like my brain is on steroids. Yeah. That's what people say to me.
That's what I felt like.
And in some ways it is actually. It is a neurosteroid.
I know, but it's fantastic. Right. And when you combine it with the alpha, I'm seeing incredible results. I mean, game-changing. Over this past week, I've been blown away by how much my brain has and comparable to what it used to even 2 weeks ago.
Can you share the dosages if you're okay?
Yeah, I use 2 droppers in the morning, which equals 600 milligrams of the alpha. Okay. And then pregnenolone, I'm on, Mark's got me on currently, I believe it's 100 milligrams a day.
Okay. And so for people who aren't aware, pregnenolone is often considered to be the mother hormone. I think we're saying the word mother a lot in this.
It's fantastic. It makes sense for me.
for whatever reason. But basically that can be converted into other hormones such as DHEA or progesterone, which are very, very helpful.
So DHEA I take at night, 25 milligrams.
Okay, you take at night. And you find that to be pretty calming overall? Because from my understanding, DHEA can decrease cortisol. Because people think DHEA, testosterone, this stuff's going to ramp me up. And don't get me wrong, you take a lot of it, it can. But if you have too little of it, your cortisol goes up. Right. So when you have high testosterone, your cortisol goes down. When you have high and then the reverse is true as well. So when your cortisol is low, then your testosterone is higher. Right. That's why, not to be too crass, but when people are kind of, hornier when they're in a light mood, you're not horny when you're super stressed out about something, and that has to do with hormones.
Absolutely.
So, I think it's important for us to, talk about that a little bit more openly, because people are afraid, I think, to talk about hormones, particularly for men, and then also particularly for younger women. It seems like the one category where we're kind of okay with it for whatever reason is, menopausal women. It seems to be I'm saying zero controversy, but not so much. But, when you talk about perimenopausal women going on hormones, taking a little bit of testosterone like yourself in the 30s, people kind of think you're crazy. But, I think that's something that we do need to address. So I'm so happy that, you connected with Dr. Mark Gordon, that he's done that, because I don't think I've had, someone on the podcast yet, a female anyway, talk about how they got on hormone replacement therapy, how it made such a big difference. So that's fantastic.
I've been speaking about it in terms of SSRI damage, right? So when I went on Lex Friedman a few years ago, one of the biggest pieces of feedback that we got was a lot of women were emailing being like, oh my God, I've been on an SSRI and birth control for 2 decades. No wonder I don't feel this way. And they would sit down and listen to that episode with their husband. And there was this understanding and commonality that happened where it was like it clicked. Like, okay, we need to have a different conversation about our hormones here. And so I don't think there should be any shame in it. And I think predominantly women have an issue with discussing it because a lot of people care about what other people think of them. And I've crossed that threshold a long time ago where that just doesn't matter to me. And my whole goal is, when speaking about these things, is to speak about them because no one is speaking about them.
Yeah, it's important that you are speaking about them, because just that single intervention of testosterone for women can make a massive difference. And for whatever reason, I bet, like, I don't have the exact stats, but if I was to guess, I would say that less than 1% of Canadian physicians have prescribed testosterone for women in their life.
Oh, 1,000%. I believe that.
And to come back to the other point you made, though, we do need to start talking about, hormones a little bit more, because, if we don't, it's always going to be stigmatized. And for whatever reason, men and young women seem to be stigmatized the most, and sometimes they need it just as much as menopausal women. So again, really happy that you said that. I know we only have, maybe 10 or 15 minutes.
You take as long as you want. I am right here.
Have you got time?
I got time.
That's awesome.
You're good.
That's good. You've been talking a lot about MAID recently. I've posted quite a bit about MAID. I think you have some, pretty strong feelings on it. So, what do you think of MAID overall?
I mean, look, I have no issue if you are somebody who is terminally ill. My answer has always been this. If you want to end your life, you're going to end your life whether we give you permission or not. That's a reality we need to all understand. We have 44 individuals take their life every single day in my community. In the veteran community, we have 44 people take their lives every day.
And is that, like, what stats are you including that? Is that North America?
North America, yeah. And Canada's not really looked at near as much as the United States. So if I'm speaking honestly, it's probably predominantly America. But you start stacking Canadians into that and you're going to see that number rise.
And also, too, a very important number there, Kelsi, you posted this the other day. Correct me if I'm wrong, but more Canadian veterans have died from suicide than from combat in the Afghanistan war.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. I mean, a vet told me that about 10 years ago. Fabian Henry, what was his name? He told me that, and I'm not sure if I haven't verified that, but it looks like it seems to be repeated over and over.
Well, and the thing you need to also realize too is not every suicide is counted as a suicide too, right? Insurance is a big thing.
Yeah.
So the issue that I have with MAID has always been this. If you're going to take your life, you're going to take your life. But when you start mandating things to be accessible to those who are mentally ill, you are sending the wrong message. You are sending the same message to mentally ill patients that it's okay to end your life, while on the back end you're saying, well, no, we'll put you on a psych hold for 72 hours if you're going to harm yourself. It's hypocrisy and it makes no sense. And people say, well, Kelsi, they should have access to MAID if they're terminally ill. No, they should not. They should have access to better palliative care and pain management strategy. That is where Canada fails its individuals as they age. Because the issue is, when you crack open a law, sure, just like Bill C-11 was supposed to just cover the news, it is going to be walked through by other different people, meaning they will now censor podcasts. Then they will now censor free speech. Then they will tell you that the mentally ill, now it's children, now it's this. It's people that they don't want to have to look after, the people that are liabilities to society or are seen as less than. So that is individuals who are terminally ill. That is individuals who are a burden on the system, i.e. veterans. That is individuals who are a burden on the healthcare system, which is the mentally ill and individuals who are addicted to drugs. These are all issues because in the MAID statute on the website on canada.gov. And people have come at me about this, and I just say, go read it. Don't believe me. Go read it then. I don't care to argue with you. They're allowing it to be given to children down to the age of 12 with parent consent. So there are people out there that are going to abuse that. That's just, I'm sorry. It's the same way that when cannabis was first legalized, people abused it. The same way that when opioids were given, it was abused. Somebody will always abuse the opportunity, and we need to understand that. So when you start to legalize MAID and you make it accessible to the mentally ill, the message you are sending is that you do not need to get better. We do not care if you survive through depression. It's easier to kill you. And the reason they're doing it is because you're damn well sure someone's making money. Someone is making money, because you can't tell me that they just want to start offing mentally ill patients for no reason. You can't, there's nobody in the world will convince me of that. You have individuals. You had one in British Columbia last month where she walked in asking for help, put me on a hold. I am suicidal. And they offered her MAID. I was on the phone last night with.
How old was this person?
She was in, I believe, in her like late 20s, early 30s.
That's insane.
And this is not supposed to be legal until March of next year. It was tabled, right? It was supposed to come out of March of this year. Now it's tabled till March of 24. So the issue with this is you've got people and doctors who have the potential to be getting kickbacks, just like they did with vaccines and anything else that they want you to do that is outside your comfortability. And you're seeing it because you have people who are being killed within a 24-hour period. So there is a really incredible disabled activist named Liz Carr. Okay. She's been in Loki. You name the movie, she's been in it. She's from the UK. I did Piers Morgan, and they called me that week and said, Kelsi, we are flying to Vancouver. Can we film with you? We are making a documentary about MAID, because the UK is trying to put MAID into the legislation, and they are trying to stop it. They interviewed with another two daughters that are from down the street, not too far from me. Their mother was offered MAID without anyone's permission or consent or conversation, and they killed her. And the RCMP got involved because it was so suspicious and so quick. And to make matters worse, I was given a leaked, slideshow from British Columbia Fraser Health. It was leaked on the Daily Mail. I worked with the Daily Mail to get this out. It came out on July 1st on Canada Day this year. It's in the Daily Mail. You can see it in my on Kelsi Sheren on Instagram, and you can just read it. It's very simple. This was given from Fraser Health to the pensioners of British Columbia. So individuals that were 75 and above, who had worked their entire life, saved all their money, paid their income taxes, and done what they should, who are otherwise healthy other than being elderly, were given a slideshow at the Newton Library on, I believe, June 2nd. And the names of the people who offered the slideshow, who have been working for Health Canada and Fraser Health for over 8 years, were excited and happy to bring you the new opportunity of MAID. And it states in the slideshow that within 24 hours, you could have yourself killed. And they will do it without conversing with family members. And they say, well, that's just not true. Well, the Daily Mail reached out to them for comment. They said, how many people did you send this to? And they said, well, we didn't. Well, on the back end of the metadata, it shows thousands.
That's insane. And how many people follow through with that?
Well, how many people can no longer afford to live? How many people can no longer afford to get groceries? Well, it feels like an easier way out now, doesn't it? When they'll do it for you, and they'll do it at any hospital, and they'll do it within 24 hours. And then you have companies like Simon's Department Store out of Quebec. Simon's Department Store used MAID as one of their advertising opportunities. And an individual who decided to end her life using MAID, they used her in a commercial to advertise their homeware, their kitchenware, and their goods.
That's insane, and it sounds criminal, and I can't believe that's happened in Canada. But given the fact that everything's going on the last 3 years, I guess it's not it's not a shock. Incredible to hear.
No,
it's not a shock.
But it's been happening. They've been offering it to veterans on the record since 2019.
I really wanted to. I didn't know about 2019. How it was went that far back. But I did want to ask you about. I wish I had the article, but I'm sure you will remember it. Maybe it was 3 months ago, 6 months ago, somewhere in that period. I think there was a veteran who was denied, I think, some kind of access either to medication or something, some kind of treatment, but they were offered MAID. And it seemed like they were I mean, I think I can go ahead and say it. It seemed like they were almost trying to like push MAID on certain groups of veterans, or certainly let them know that this is an option for them.
So her name was Christine Gauthier. She's been on the show as well. She is not only a Paralympian, a gold medalist in the Invictus Games, but also a Paralympian. I believe she was when was the last one? Rio. And so she is a decorated athlete, represent Canada. She was one of the first female artillery gunners. She was paralyzed due to poor leadership in artillery in Canada. Excuse me. And she'd been asking for a wheelchair ramp and for it to be replaced in her home because she can't get in and out of her home. And that's all she was asking for. And they have record of them offering her MAID. They were offering MAID to special operations friends of ours. They've offered it to other individuals. There are voice recordings.
What do you mean? So hang on though. Like it's not justifiable, but in their, mind, they're thinking, okay, maybe we'll offer MAID to someone who, is in a wheelchair or is wheelchair bound. But you're saying that they're offering it to like special forces. Like, are these people sick? Are these people in wheelchairs? Like who are they offering it to outside of the people who are, severely disabled? And again, not that it's okay to offer it to severely disabled people.
So the first individual that it was offered to, and I won't say his name, a friend of mine came to me because he was close with him. This was a straight up special forces dude, and he was struggling with PTSD and a traumatic brain injury. And he was calling to ask for treatment for the traumatic brain injury. So he was not indicating that he was suicidal. He was asking for help. And there's an audio recording, which I've heard and have, where it's them offering MAID instead. Here's the thing. What people don't realize, and they're like, but why would they offer MAID to veterans first? The same reason they mandate vaccines to veterans first. We're very often the guinea pig in a lot of different situations to see whether the rest of society is going to push back or allow it to happen. So with the military members, the majority of us who served, a lot of us, let's be honest, we served because of 9/11. And we're what we call GWAT kids, GWAT babies, right? We're GWATs, meaning, and GWAT means like Afghanistan and Iraq. And so I'm speaking to, American there a bit. But what I'm saying is most of us joined it 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Unless we were in prior to 9/11, then those guys got it a little later. Well, if you sustain an injury due to the government putting you in a position, whether you're in the service or not, they now legally have to look after you till your pensioned out. Meaning the amount of financial weight that puts on the system, it is so much easier to kill you than it is to heal you.
Yeah, those are real strong words. They're real hard to hear, but I think that you're, 100% right. And we're probably going to find out that you are right, as time passes on. But I mean, you can't argue with that. I mean, someone who is, a very expensive person to, house, feed, give money to, pension to, all these kinds of things. Obviously it would be much, much cheaper just to offer the MAID.
Absolutely.
And you got to think that that's one of the reasons, or perhaps even the main reason why, this is being pushed on veterans so much. And yeah, I mean, you guys have always kind of been the guinea pigs, and you guys were the last, I think, to have the mandates removed, or are the mandates even still in the military right now?
I'm not 100% sure. Last I saw, a lot of people, the majority of people that I knew that stood for anything left. They weren't.
Yeah. And I mean, generally speaking, I mean, the people who are, rebel the most are generally like younger military aged people, men and women, but probably men even more so. But I mean, men and women between 20 to 40, those are the people who kind of tend to rebel sort of the most, against the government and have these anti-government movements and that kind of thing. But it seems like those are the people who are also being attacked the most as well. And so, what is the kind of sense that in the veteran community with all this going on and the mandates and that kind of thing?
I mean, the sense is very simple. You either caved to it because you felt like you had no other choice because you had family to feed, yada yada yada. You want your pension, or you just straight up stood your ground and said, "You've shot me up with enough vaccines that you don't tell us what they are and what they're for, and you sent us into enough shitty situations. I'm not going to let you take my healthy heart, my healthy brain, and my body, because this is the one thing that we have. We have one. We have one." And we don't get to fix it once it goes into your body. It's the same with MAID. You make that decision, the decision is made, it's over. So you can't, the people, like I said, the people I saw, they left. The majority of the individuals, the company I keep, they left. It's not to say that those that are in the military, because you stayed, that you are any less than. That was your choice. That is on you, and you have to live with it, and you alone. I don't put you down for it. I don't say anything. That is your choice. 100%.
I mean, so I had Andrew G. Huff on the podcast recently. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He's kind of friends with Robert Kennedy Jr. And that kind of thing. But he basically said that he thinks that it's getting so bad for recruiting in the States that the only way out is that there's going to have to be a draft at some point, just because the military numbers are so low. And he also said too, like, there's a lot of people in the military where they have a lot of data. There's a lot of engineers there, mathematicians. There's very smart people who understand the data and understand that, if so many people exit, we're going to have so many people come in. And from what my discussion with Andrew had, he said that that's just not happening right now. Like, we're not getting more people coming in than we are people leaving. And, things are not going to add up. And at some point, then the only thing is going to have to be a draft. And do you think that could also happen in Canada as well? I
mean, we are falling straight full face, 2 feet, dive into communism. So I don't see how it can't be. But I will be honest with you, the United States has had its lowest retention rates. Canada's had its lowest retention rates. But that's from a combination of things, right? You've got people realized what GWAT was. Let's be honest with ourselves. What was that? What did we accomplish? Nothing. They learned that they put individuals in harm's way for no reasons, because they don't listen to the chain of command. They don't listen to what actually is going on the ground, right? They don't listen to those people. So people don't want to do it anymore. You have lower retention rates because you have the military's gone woke. The military is one of the most, the wokest establishment I've seen in a long time. And it is damaging and degrading what it means to be a soldier. Then you have the COVID mandates, which are, you have to put this in your body, even though it's not tested, it's not safe. And we've proven it over and over and over again. And then people are getting out because of that. The Canadian military quite literally kicked out one of the most deadly snipers in the world. And their team, who had extensive knowledge that could be passed down and taught, and they booted him out because he wouldn't put a mask on and would not put a vaccine in. They're not thinking long term. They're not thinking about retention rates. They're not thinking about passing knowledge. It's not like post 9/11 where you had all of these Vietnam guys that were still in, who had a ton of knowledge to pass down to the ranks. We're literally kicking out the best and brightest, because the best and brightest are not standing for what's being told to them. And they're seeing, I'm not going to fight on behalf of this country, where this country will kill me faster than it'll heal me after I come back from a war that is more than often a proxy war. So none of us want to be involved. Anybody who's seen real war will never advocate for war again, and they will never advocate for mandates or the way that the military is looking after itself or showing itself to the world right now.
Yeah, I can understand that. I mean, if the military is not, producing good people, if they're not, training people properly, if they're, doing things that are woke, where, you're not going to be able to defend yourself with your, other comrades, then why would you want to, join it? So I totally understand why people have this particular attitude that they have right now. It's like, why do I want to join like a loser movement, so to speak, as harsh as that maybe sounds?
Well, that's the reality too. Let's look at Canada for a quick second. They just cut the military budget. There are people on bases that don't even have drinking water. There are people who had to pay for their flights to go to Latvia on deployment. There are people who had to buy their own food and their own helmets. But yet we can send 600 plus million over to Ukraine to fight a proxy war, and that money's not even going to the front lines. So don't tell me that people leave the Canadian military because they don't want to serve. They want to serve, but they want to serve Canada, and the Canada that was 8 years ago, not the Canada that is now.
Yeah, they want to serve a country that they're proud of, not a country that they're embarrassed of.
Exactly.
So again, I know you have more time. I don't have too much more time, but I do want to talk about something that could potentially affect both of us. And could affect, what we're doing right now. And that's the CRTC and the podcasting. So from my understanding right now, you don't have to submit unless you're podcasting or your podcast generates more than 10 million a year in revenue, something like that. I'm obviously not at 10 million a year. So I don't have to register, but the danger is, are they just going to open it up then for everybody? Like, even if you make $0 off your podcast, you have to submit it. So what are your thoughts?
I just, before I came on here, did like a 5-minute breakdown of what the CRTC is asking of Canadian content creators, because I wanted it.
Well, it's fresh in your mind. Perfect.
Super fresh in my mind. Yeah, I'm super sorry about the intensity you're about to get. But listen, I have been talking about Bill C-11 now for a couple of years, ever since it started to be even brought forward. I was like, this is going to be a problem. I need people to hear this. Why aren't people listening and talking about this? And you're finally now seeing it come to fruition. When the bill was passed on the floor, they essentially said, this is going to cover the news stations. This is going to cover content that way. Don't worry, we're never going to censor anything else. Well, come to find out, now they're here's the MAID issue again. We put the bill in, and now we don't get to decide what walks through, right? So yes, this may have been a bit of the purview, but it's not the purview anymore. Now it's covering podcasters, right? So, this will never affect you. Their whole stance is, we want Canadian content creators and Indigenous Canadian content creators to be shown proportionately. Well, that's just not true. And we all know it. And you're all talking out your ass at that point. And their issue is, they want you, if you are making more than 10 million, to sign up on a list. So we go from last week from having an actual living SS breathing Nazi get a standing ovation in Parliament, to now we're going to get you to put yourself on a list. And essentially who this covers, and nobody's really making in Canada that I know of, and I'm so sorry if you are, and I totally missed you. I apologize. Truly, I mean that. Nobody's doing more than Jordan. Jordan Peterson.
100%. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I mean,
I'm right.
That point where there was one time he was on Rogan. I know he's been on a few times, but people have highlighted this clip over and over, where he said, what they're going to do is they're going to come after you for a little bit, and then they're going to move a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more. And that's exactly what they're doing. And that's exactly what they've done. And Jordan's exactly right. So I mean, bringing him up on this podcast, I'll bring him up every podcast. So
I think he's great. I reached out to Michaela yesterday, and I was like, look, how are you guys getting around this? What are you doing? Because the fact of the matter is, VPNs don't work. All of these things aren't working. I've seen it. I've tried them. I've talked to my squirrel friends who know this area.
VPN Express doesn't work.
I use VPN Express, and it doesn't work. I find it says I'm somewhere else, but then when I post, the metadata says Canada still. So it's a little bit of a dicey issue. I've reached out to them. I haven't heard back. Anyway, I digress. When we're talking about Jordan, it does feel a little bit like the Canadian government is hyper targeting Jordan Peterson, because if you do look at Canadian content creators that are podcasters, I can't think of off the top of my head. And again, truly apologize if you are making more than 10 million and I am unaware of it. You may be a TikToker or a YouTuber, and you may be making that kind of money, and fuck yeah, get some. I'm proud of you for that. And you should have the right to, and you should not have to go on a list. But what this feels like is an attack on free speech against somebody as big as Jordan, because Jordan gets on Joe. Jordan gets the eyes. He gets the views. He gets the people. And he's what's got Canada put on the map from a free speech perspective. So it feels like this is hyper targeted a little bit, because he's, I think, maybe a handful of people that'll be on that list. That being said, it starts with him, but it is going to trickle down to everybody who has a podcast, and anybody who has a podcast, whether they go by downloads or they go by revenue. You're going to have to sign up on that list. And I said it on the clip this morning, mark my words, give this 6 months, you and I'll sit down again and I'll go, did you register? Because you're going to have to.
Yep. Yeah. And also too, I mean, for myself, my podcast is a lot of medical content too, right? And I really know that they don't like medical content, particularly if it's against the grain, or if it's against, what the mainstream narrative or media is saying. So, unfortunately, I don't have much hope for it. I do think that they are going to come down eventually. And, when they do, if I'm going to do whatever I can to fight back. I don't know, what that is. Because I kind of mentioned this recently on a post on Instagram, and someone said, how do you fight back? And right now I don't know what that looks like, but I know that when the time comes, if I have to, I will create a plan, I'll share it, and I'll definitely fight back.
Yeah, and you have to. I think one of the biggest things that I'm attempting to do for podcasters and anybody I know that has a show that I believe is worth listening to, whether it's because they're breaking the mold, it's health related, or it's outside the norm. And, I don't listen to shows where people just talk shit about TV shows and other things. I really do try to sit down and have really meaningful, deep conversations, just like you do as well. And so Hart2Heart. Yeah. And That's exactly what it comes down to. So my way of combating this is doing my best to get on bigger podcast shows and talk about this and make them aware. I'm got my episode with the real ones coming out real soon. I'm going on trigonometry over in the UK, and I'm doing my best to just talk to as many people about the Canadian podcasters that don't have a big enough voice, that are like, hey, you guys may not know of this show, but you need to know of it, and let me tell you why. So it's about rising tides. And I really believe if you get enough of us to be loud and get on all these bigger shows, it's going to make a difference, because I truly cannot sit there and say that there's no way we can fight this. I don't believe it. I believe there's always a way to fight. It's just about outmaneuvering, being more strategic, connecting, and getting with the people who are bigger than you, because nobody doing more than you is ever going to shit on you. And if you reach up for help, they will more than likely give you a hand. So there are ways around this, whether it's getting your show produced in America and having it uploaded in America. There are ways where you can have people get on tour and upload for you. You can get around this, but you have to get smart. You have to get strategic, and you seriously have to get tactical.
Well, I think that's a great way to end the show. That was a perfect last note there. And, the people who produce my show actually are out of the state. So hopefully I won't, get on that list. That might be my strategic maneuver around it. But Kelsi, thank you so much for everything that you shared. I think you shared so much great knowledge, particularly about the testosterone, the SSRIs, and your stories with, cannabis and psilocybin. It was really amazing. I think a lot of people are going to benefit from that. And thank you so much, everyone, for listening. And as always, I'll be back again next week.